Tim Squyres, thank you for joining us. I want to start off just by asking you, you've edited practically every movie that Ang Lee has ever directed. I believe
Oh my
it's
God.
11 out of 12. Uh,
Yes, 11 out of 12 or 12. I think it's 11 out of 12. Yes.
okay. So, uh, what's it like working with someone for that long?
Well, you get into very comfortable rhythms of working. On a movie, on set, there are hundreds of people around and this whole hierarchy and chain of command and procedures that you have to go through. In the editing room, it's just two guys sitting in a room. So we can do whatever we want. We can goof off all day if we want. So, over the years, you develop a rhythm, a way of working, and we, have done it a lot together and have come up with a very comfortable yet very productive way of getting work done.
Mhm. And with Life of Pi, talk a bit about working on that together.
Yeah, that was a complicated movie. And, obviously the visual effects in 3D, there's a lot of technical challenges. But actually the hardest part of Life of Pi, from an editor's standpoint, was some of the more basic storytelling aspects of it.
Hmm.
For a large portion of the film, our main character is lost at sea. He's not controlling his destiny. He's not trying to accomplish anything except stay alive. And it's hard to show somebody lost at sea without the audience feeling at some point that we're drifting.
Right.
Um, there's things that happen, but there's no cause and effect. The whale just shows up when it shows up. The flying fish just show up when they show up. They're not there in response to anything. So trying to give an audience the sense of a narrative, a narrative that's taking you through, which people like, it was quite a challenge. And there were a lot more scenes in there that we shot and didn't use, and things moved around, and trying to find a tone and a pacing, all of the sort of normal things that an editor does, was quite complicated in the film. And then, of course, there were the technical challenges too, the 3D and the visual effects.
Now, talk a bit about that. I mean, what are the difficulties of integrating special effects and then laying 3D on top of that? Especially in the initial phases of editing where you're really trying to get the pace right, and for a lot of it, you don't
Yeah.
even know what you're looking at, I guess.
Well, no, you do. First of all, I mean,
Okay.
3D isn't laid on top of it. 3D is right from the beginning. I worked in 3D. We shot in 3D, and I edited only in 3D. So 3D was never an afterthought. 3D was the basic way that we worked. So that there's a lot of work that goes into 3D, a lot of adjustments. Anytime you just do a dissolve, fade from one shot into another, in 3D it's complicated,
Hmm.
or it might be complicated depending on what's going on with the shot. So all those things we were doing as we went along with everything else. Now with the visual effects, right from the beginning, I mean, our visual effects, sometimes visual effects are making a back, just knocked the phone on the floor, uh, just making the background look pretty or something like that, and
Hmm.
you can edit without that. But in our case, our main visual effect is one of our main characters.
Hmm.
So again, right from the beginning, we had crude animation. We had done a pre-visualization of a lot of the
Okay, I
film.
see.
And so we took the tiger, the animals out of the previs and put it right from the day I was first cutting the scenes. I was putting tigers in so that at least you could watch it like a movie
Hmm.
and understand what your characters were doing. And then we refined the animation as we went along.
Hmm. Now, this film has a very distinct kind of framing device. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, the film begins and ends in the present day Montreal, where adult Pi is telling his story to a writer who's been sent there by his uncle from India, who said, "I know somebody who has a great story to tell."
Hmm.
Uh, that's really important. It's important to understand that what we're seeing is a story that we're being told. We're not just, in a movie, it's not just the filmmakers telling a story. The story, the reality of the movie is this apartment in Montreal in the present, where someone is telling us stories about the past. And that becomes thematically important later on in the film when we find out that there's also a different story. And so the first part of the movie, we're going back and forth between the guys in Montreal and Pi's life growing up before the shipwreck. And, you know, it's important to establish that we're being told a series of stories, some of which are true, some of which seem a little fanciful. And then we get into the big story, and then we come back at the end and are reminded, oh, this is a story. Because thematically that becomes very important, that in the end you're asked to choose between two stories, and you're not asked to choose which story you believe. Pi is very specific about that. He doesn't ask the writer which story he believes, he asks which story he prefers. And that in that lies the whole meaning of the film. That framing device, in a slightly different way, exists in the book as well. And that's important. You know, we never considered, obviously the subject comes up, but we never considered just telling the story of Pi growing up and surviving this ordeal, because that's not the point. You know, it's not an adventure story. It looks like an adventure story. But it's a sort of a musing on philosophy and theology wrapped around an adventure story. But you know, that larger intellectual idea is what the book is really about, and so we wanted to be true to that in the movie as well.
I want to talk a bit about you know, Ang Lee. Like I said, you've edited practically every film he's made. So, what is it about him as a director that, you know, makes you want to keep working with him?
Well, you know, one of the great things about Ang is he does not make the same movie over and over again. He really challenges himself. He's always looking for something new. If it weren't for my relationship with him, I doubt I would have edited a comic book superhero movie or a martial arts film. You know, he is not ready to rest on his laurels yet. And to take on a challenge like Life of Pi, which is an extremely difficult book to adapt, you know, I really like being asked to do new things, new challenges, things I've never done before. You know, he challenges himself and he challenges everybody who works with him. People, somehow or other, when people work on an Ang Lee film, they tend to do some of the best work they've ever done. And you know, it's not that he forces you or pushes you or anything, but he has a way of getting the best out of everyone. So, and it's partly that you see how much he's challenging himself. He likes to stretch, and I'm very happy to be, you know, to be brought along with that.
What is it that you learned from this film? What is it that you took away from working on this film?
Well, you know, every film is different. In this film, I mean, first, there are some big technical things that I learned about 3D. You know, all the 3D is, you know, there are a bunch of technical variables involved with 3D, and it's kind of complicated to learn all of that. But I had to, because we decided that I was going to be the post-production stereographer. So there's this whole mass of technical and technical aesthetic things that have to do with, you know, with physiology, because a lot of how making 3D work well has to do with your eyes, actually your visual processing system. So there's all that whole technical side of it, which was fascinating. Beyond that, you know, it's trying to tell a story where for a big chunk of it there's no narrative, really. I mean, there's a narrative, but there's no, you know, it's not like a caper movie where we're trying to set up the bank robbery and a whole bunch of things have to happen. It just, stuff happens. So it was really about establishing a tone. And, you know, I think we sort of achieved, and by we, I mean mostly Rhythm and Hughes and our visual effects people and Claudio Miranda, our DP. I think what we did visually, you know, with the visual effects and the cinematography and the 3D and everything, is really striking. mean, that's one of the things that people really come away with in this film is just how powerful the visuals are, and how evocative the visuals are. And it's complicated on this film because for most of the film, certainly the part that people consider the really visually stunning part of the film, we're looking at a boat, a raft, a tiger, a kid, an ocean, and a sky, and that's it. We don't have, we can't do the disco scene and the chase scene and all those. We're stuck with very few elements to manipulate, and yet to try to keep it visually strong and to that we managed to accomplish that as well as we did, kind of reinforced the power of visual storytelling. It was really interesting to see that come together and to feel how the ocean, it's still the ocean, but the way we were able to make it change with the light and the waves, and it was really, really striking, I think.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a bit more about the ending of the film? Because here you have this film where, you have this boy and this tiger going on this great adventure out at sea, and it ends really with just him kind of telling a story back to the Japanese officials. And
it's interesting in a film. If you go watch a movie, you're not thinking about whether or not you believe it. It's not the issue. If you're watching fiction, like maybe if you're watching Argo, you think about whether or not you believe it because that's based on fact. Right. But Pi clearly isn't. So it was, the Japanese investigators are there partly to make you question, because you have to question in this film whether or not you believe the story you've just heard. Because it's a great story, but if you think about it, maybe it is kind of unbelievable. So we had to have characters express that disbelief, and express it enough that he told this other story. Now, and then the key line in the both the movie and the book is Pi says. And I don't know if people who are seeing this will have not seen the movie. If so, you should not watch for the next 30 seconds.
Hopefully everyone's seen it by now. So.
Yeah. Pi says, I told you two stories. Neither one explains what causes the sinking of the ship. No one can prove which story is true. So which story do you prefer? He doesn't ask him which story he believes. He asks him which story he prefers. The writer replies, the one with the tiger. That's the better story. And Pi replies, and what is the most important line in the book, according to Jan Martel, who wrote the book, thank you, and so it goes with God. Now, when I read the book, what that line meant was absolutely clear to me. And I was then surprised in reading a criticism that people had various interpretations. I think anything to do with religion, with faith and theology, people tend to see things through the lens of whatever they brought with them. They will adapt it to fit their own theological beliefs, and that is part of why people love the book so much, is because of this intellectual idea. And so we didn't want to clarify it any more than that. People are still free to draw their own judgments, but it's the question of why you choose to believe what you believe. At the beginning of the film, the writer relates that Pi's uncle back in India said that Pi has a story that will make you believe in God. And Pi makes a joke out of it. But people take that line very seriously, that that somehow this movie is going to make me believe in God. But that's a statement that's not to be taken at face value. As Pi makes a joke out of it. He says he would say that about a nice meal. So it's a film about faith. It's a film about why people believe. So I don't want to get too much into analyzing exactly what we mean by that. But, our hope is that we stimulated a lot of conversations at the bar afterwards about what it means and who believes which story. Of course, ultimately, both stories are fiction. But I think it was hard to kind of balance that story. We didn't want the ending. We didn't want to clearly say one thing or the other, or tip our hands too much on that. But yeah, it was interesting trying to get the audience to a point where they would think about what that ending meant. Think about, do I believe this story? Why do I believe this story? And then he says, and so it goes with God. Okay, how does my feeling about choosing between these stories relate to religion, which is what the book is actually about?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
Sure.